It was a typical morning for Jamal. He was a regular 16-year-old boy, going to school just like everyone else. He had a worn-out backpack slung over his shoulder, his uniform neatly pressed, and his sneakers squeaked with every step. Jamal lived in a small neighborhood, far from the busy city center, but today was different. Today, something unexpected would change his life forever. Jamal stepped onto the bus as usual, greeted by the familiar faces of his classmates. The bus was crowded as always, with people standing in the aisles, some half-heartedly looking at their phones, others chatting quietly. But there was a tense energy in the air today. Something was off. He made his way down the aisle, his eyes scanning for a seat. That's when he noticed her, a woman sitting near the back of the bus. She was middle-aged, dressed in old clothes that seemed to have seen better days. Her hair was unkempt, and her hands trembled slightly as she clutched a bag to her chest. She was trying to keep to herself, but something about her caught Jamal's attention. There was an uneasy vibe around her, a feeling of being out of place. Before Jamal could think much more about it, the situation took a sharp turn. A loud voice broke the stillness of the bus. "Hey, you! Move over!" a man shouted. The woman looked up, startled, but didn't respond. Jamal could see the fear in her eyes. The man, who was standing in the aisle, was much bigger than her. He was pushing past passengers, his movements aggressive. The woman tried to stay calm, but the tension was clear. She didn't want trouble, but the man wasn't letting it go. "Come on, move. I said move," he yelled again, shoving her seat. Jamal could see that no one on the bus was saying a word. People were avoiding eye contact, pretending not to notice. That's when it hit him. No one was standing up for her. Jamal could feel his heart racing. He had seen situations like this before, where people stayed silent, letting the wrong things happen. But today, something inside him snapped. He couldn't just watch. He couldn't pretend that everything was okay. Without thinking, Jamal walked over to the man and stood in his path. The man, who hadn't noticed Jamal approaching, stopped in his tracks. He looked down at the younger boy, a sneer spreading across his face. "What's this? You want a piece of me, kid?" The man's voice was low and threatening. Jamal didn't back down. He stood tall, his chest rising with determination. "She didn't do anything wrong." "Leave her alone," he said, his voice steady but firm. The man's eyes widened with surprise. "What? You want to fight me?" He looked at Jamal, sizing him up. He was clearly bigger and stronger, but Jamal wasn't afraid. The woman watched, her eyes wide, as Jamal stood his ground. She couldn't believe someone was finally speaking up for her. The man was still glaring at Jamal, but something in his eyes seemed to change. Maybe he was starting to realize that this wasn't a fight he could win. After a moment, the man grumbled something under his breath, his face turning red with anger. "Fine," he muttered, stepping back. "You better be careful, kid." He turned and walked to the back of the bus, muttering angrily under his breath. Jamal didn't take his eyes off him until he disappeared from view. Jamal took a deep breath, his hand still shaking slightly from the adrenaline. He turned to the woman, who was looking at him with a mix of gratitude and surprise. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. The woman nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm fine, thank you," she said, her eyes filling with tears. She hadn't expected anyone to step in, especially not a young boy. It had been a long time since anyone had treated her with kindness. Jamal smiled at her, but as he did, he noticed something strange. The woman seemed almost familiar. There was something about her that made Jamal feel like he had seen her before. But before he could think any more about it, the bus came to a stop. The woman stood up, still holding her bag tightly. "Take care," she said, nodding to him with a small smile, and then she stepped off the bus. Jamal stood there for a moment, watching her leave. He had done something he wasn't sure he could do, but it felt good. He had stood up for what was right, and for a moment, It felt like the world had become a little bit better. But as Jamal walked off the bus and headed home, he couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter wasn't over. Something about the woman, and the way she had looked at him, made him wonder, who was she really? And why did she seem so grateful for such a small gesture? The next morning, Jamal woke up to the sound of his phone buzzing on the nightstand. He had barely slept the night before, his mind racing with thoughts of the woman on the bus. Who was she? Why did she look at him like that? What was so special about her? He rolled over, rubbed his eyes, and reached for his phone. It was a message from his best friend, Marcus. "Hey man, you see that crazy thing on the news last night? I heard something about a big surprise at a bus stop or something." Jamal sat up quickly. He didn't remember seeing anything unusual on the news, but then again, he hadn't been paying attention. After yesterday's events, his mind had been elsewhere. He thought about replying, but just as he was about to type, there was a knock at the door. Startled, Jamal got up from his bed and walked down the hallway to answer it. He wasn't expecting anyone. It was too early for friends to come over. When he opened the door, his heart skipped a beat. There in front of him stood a tall man in a dark suit, holding a clipboard. Behind him, a sleek black Mercedes-Benz was parked at the curb. The car looked brand new, polished to perfection. Jamal's eyes widened in surprise. He had no idea who this man was or why he was standing at his door. "Good morning," the man said, his voice calm but professional. "Are you Jamal Edwards?" Jamal nodded, his mind racing. "Yeah, that's me. What's going on?" The man smiled slightly. "I have a delivery for you. Can I come in for a moment?" Jamal hesitated, feeling the sudden wave of confusion. He had no idea what was happening. "A delivery? I didn't order anything." The man's smile didn't falter. "It's not from you, but it's for you. Please, just a moment." Still confused, Jamal stepped aside and let the man in. He watched as the man walked into the living room and placed the clipboard on the coffee table. The man then pulled out a large envelope and handed it to Jamal. "This is for you, from someone who wishes to remain anonymous," the man explained. "Please read it at your convenience." Jamal stared at the envelope. It was thick, and there was a wax seal on the back, something he hadn't seen in years. It looked important. He opened it slowly, and inside was a letter, neatly typed on crisp paper. "Dear Jamal, thank you for your unexpected act of kindness yesterday. You may not realize it, but your courage has not gone unnoticed. You stood up for a person in need, and now it is time for you to receive a gesture of gratitude that matches your character. The car outside is yours. It's a gift, something to help you on your journey. But there is more to this story than you may realize. Everything is connected. Trust that your actions will lead you down a path that will change your life forever. Be ready for what comes next. With deepest thanks, a friend." Jamal's hands shook slightly as he read the letter. His mind was spinning. The car outside. A gift. From who? And what did it mean when the letter said, "Everything is connected"? He looked at the man in the suit, who was still standing in the living room, watching him. This is real?" Jamal asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The man nodded. "Yes, it is. The car is yours, along with everything that comes with it. You'll find the keys inside the envelope as well. As for the rest of the story, you'll soon understand." Jamal was still in shock. His thoughts raced back to the woman on the bus. Could this be connected? Was she somehow behind all of this? He had no answers, just questions. But one thing was clear. This was only the beginning. The strange twist in his life had only just started. "Wait, who is this from?" Jamal asked, looking at the man. The man smiled mysteriously. "All in good time, Jamal. Just remember, you did the right thing yesterday. And now things will start to change." Before Jamal could ask any more questions, the man turned and left, walking back out the door and disappearing into the sleek black Mercedes. Jamal stood frozen. the envelope still in his hands. The world felt like it was spinning around him. He stepped out onto the front porch, looking at the car parked in his driveway. It was real. This wasn't some dream or prank. Jamal's heart pounded in his chest as he thought about the woman on the bus. Could it really be her? Had she sent the car? Or was there someone else behind this strange turn of events? Jamal didn't know the answers yet, but he was sure of one thing. His life was about to change in ways he couldn't even imagine. He had no idea what the future held, but he felt a sense of excitement, mixed with fear, deep inside. This wasn't just about a car anymore. It was about something much bigger. The questions would keep coming, and Jamal was ready to find the answers. Jamal couldn't stop staring at the letter, the wax seal now in pieces on the floor. His mind was racing, his heart beating faster with every thought. What did all of this mean? The letter, the car, and the mysterious man. It all felt like a dream, yet everything was too real to ignore. He walked back into his house, still holding the envelope. His eyes darted to the black Mercedes parked outside, and the questions kept piling up. Who could afford to give away a car like that? Why him? And why had this strange letter singled him out? Jamal sat down at his kitchen table and opened the envelope fully. Inside, there was more than just the letter. There were also a set of keys and a small card. The card was simple, with just one word printed on it: tomorrow. He turned the card over, but there was nothing else. Jamal let out a frustrated sigh. What was the meaning of this? He had no idea what he was supposed to do with the car, or what tomorrow meant. He picked up the phone and dialed Marcus. As soon as his best friend picked up, Jamal blurted out, "Hey, man, you won't believe what happened this morning. You remember that woman on the bus?" "Yeah, the one you helped," Marcus replied, sounding confused. "What's going on?" "Something weird is happening," Jamal said, his voice shaky. "A man showed up at my door this morning. He gave me a letter, a set of keys, and a card that just says, tomorrow." Marcus laughed at first, thinking Jamal was joking. "Man, are you messing with me right now? That sounds like something out of a movie." "I wish I was messing with you," Jamal replied. "But I'm serious. There's a black Mercedes parked in my driveway, and the letter says everything is connected. And this card, it just says, tomorrow." Marcus was quiet for a moment, and Jamal could hear him trying to piece everything together. Finally, Marcus spoke up. That's strange. I don't know what to tell you, man. But if I were you, I'd find out what this tomorrow thing is all about." Jamal agreed. There was something about the situation that made him feel both excited and terrified at the same time. What could possibly happen tomorrow? Who was behind this strange turn of events? After ending the call with Marcus, Jamal stood by the window, gazing out at the sleek car that now seemed to dominate his life. The idea of driving a car like that seemed impossible, yet here it was, waiting for him. But Jamal couldn't just ignore the strange feeling in his gut. There was more to this story. He knew it. The day passed slowly. Jamal tried to go about his usual routine, but his mind kept drifting back to the letter, the car, and the mysterious man. He couldn't shake the feeling that something big was about to happen, something life-changing. That evening, Jamal sat down on the couch, the card with the word tomorrow in his hand. He stared at it, wondering what it all meant. Was it a clue, a hint, or was it simply a strange coincidence? As the sun set and night fell, Jamal's thoughts turned back to the woman on the bus. The more he thought about her, the more he realized there was something unusual about her. She had seemed so familiar, almost like she was someone he was supposed to know. But he couldn't place her face, and it was driving him crazy. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. Jamal's heart skipped a beat. He wasn't expecting anyone. He cautiously walked to the door, wondering if it was the man in the suit or maybe someone else with more answers. When he opened the door, there was no one there. But on the doorstep, there was a small plain envelope with his name written on it. Jamal picked it up and stepped back inside, closing the door behind him. He opened the envelope quickly, his hands trembling. Inside there was just one piece of paper. It was another letter. Jamal, you've done well so far, but the time for waiting is over. Tomorrow is the day. Your actions have set things in motion, and now it's time to see what happens next. Meet me at the corner of 5th and Oak at 9 a.m. Don't bring anyone. Just you. You will understand soon. A friend. Jamal felt his stomach drop. This was it. The letter confirmed it. Tomorrow would reveal everything. His mind raced with questions, but he had no choice but to follow the instructions. He had already come this far. What could possibly happen next? He looked out the window again, his thoughts spinning. What did the corner of 5th and Oak have to do with all of this? Who was he meeting? Was it the woman from the bus, or someone else entirely? Jamal knew one thing for sure. Tomorrow, everything would change. But in what way? He wasn't sure, but he had a feeling that it would be something he'd never forget. The next morning, Jamal woke up early, his heart pounding with anticipation. His mind raced with thoughts of what the meeting would reveal. He stared at the clock as it ticked closer to 9 a.m., the time he was supposed to meet the mysterious person at the corner of 5th and Oak. Jamal felt the weight of the situation pressing down on him, but there was no turning back now. He quickly dressed in a casual t-shirt and in jeans, feeling strangely out of place. Everything about this felt different. He wasn't used to uncertainty or mystery, but something told him that whatever was about to happen would change his life forever. After grabbing his jacket and the mysterious envelope, Jamal left his house and headed down the street. The morning air was cool, and there was a strange quietness to the world around him, as if everything was holding its breath, waiting for something to unfold. As Jamal reached the corner of 5th and Oak, his eyes scanned the street, searching for any sign of the person he was supposed to meet. The area was usually quiet, but today it felt even more still. The usual bustle of cars and pedestrians was strangely absent. It felt like time had slowed down. Jamal looked at his watch. It was almost 9:05. He started to wonder if this was a mistake. Maybe it was all some sort of prank. He glanced around, but there was no one in sight. Just as he was about to turn around and leave, a black car pulled up to the curb. It wasn't the Mercedes, but it was a sleek, black sedan, fancy and understated. The car came to a stop, and the window rolled down slowly. Jamal's pulse quickened as he walked closer, his footsteps echoing in the empty street. The driver, a middle-aged man with a stern expression, looked at Jamal and then gestured for him to approach. "You Jamal?" the man asked, his voice low and calm. "Yeah," Jamal replied, his voice barely a whisper. "Who are you?" The man didn't answer right away. Instead, he nodded toward the back seat. "Get in. The person you're meeting is inside." Jamal hesitated for a moment, his instincts telling him to be cautious, but his curiosity was stronger than his fear. Slowly, he opened the door and slid into the back seat. The car was plush, the interior elegant but not overly flashy. The air inside felt heavy, like something important was about to happen. As the door closed behind him, Jamal turned to see who was waiting for him. At first, he didn't recognize the person sitting across from him. It was a woman, young, with long black hair and piercing green eyes. She was dressed in a tailored suit, her presence commanding attention. She had the kind of look that told you she wasn't someone you should take lightly. "Jamal," the woman said, her voice smooth and confident. "I'm glad you could make it." Jamal swallowed hard, still trying to make sense of everything. "Who are you? What's going on? What does this have to do with me?" The woman smiled slightly, but her expression remained serious. "I know this is a lot to take in, but you've already played your part. Everything that's happened so far has been set in motion by your actions. Now it's time to understand why." Jamal felt a chill run down his spine. What was she talking about? He was just an ordinary guy who had helped a woman on the bus. None of this made sense. "Listen, I don't know what you're talking about, Jamal said, his voice shaking. I just helped a woman. I didn't do anything special. Why is all of this happening to me? The woman leaned forward slightly, her gaze intense. The woman you helped, she's not just anyone. She's someone very important, someone who has been watching you. Jamal's confusion deepened. Watching me? I don't understand. Who is she? The woman didn't answer right away. Instead, she pulled out a small folder from the seat beside her and opened it. She slid a photo across the seat to Jamal. It was a picture of the woman from the bus, but now that Jamal saw it up close, he could see the difference. This woman wasn't just an ordinary passenger. She was sitting next to a man in a suit, someone who looked very powerful. That's her, the woman said. Her name is Elizabeth, and she's not just a regular person. She's a key player in a very large network, one that deals with powerful people and important decisions. Jamal stared at the photo, his mind racing. But why does that matter to me? I don't have anything to do with all of that. The woman leaned back in her seat, her expression hard to read. You do now. You made a choice that day on the bus. You stood up for her when no one else would. That one act of kindness put you on a path that you can't turn back from. What happens next is up to you. The car was silent for a moment as Jamal absorbed the gravity of what the woman had said. His mind was spinning. What had he gotten himself into? We'll take care of everything from here, the woman said, her tone shifting. All you need to do is trust us, and you'll be part of something bigger than you ever imagined. Jamal wasn't sure whether he should be excited or terrified. He had no idea what he was getting involved in, but he felt as if he had no choice now. His life was changing, and there was no going back. As the car sped away, Jamal looked out the window, his thoughts racing. He had just stepped into a world that was far beyond anything he could have imagined. And the question that burned in his mind was, what was going to happen next? The sleek black sedan continued to weave through the city streets, its smooth ride offering no comfort to Jamal, whose mind was in turmoil. Every turn, every stoplight, only deepened his sense of unease. His thoughts raced as he tried to piece together the puzzle that was quickly becoming his life. He had helped a woman on the bus, a simple act of kindness, or so he thought. But now, sitting in the back of this expensive car, he felt the weight of something far more significant unfolding. He wasn't just a witness to a life-changing event. He was a part of it, somehow, and the questions were piling up faster than he could keep up with. As the car finally came to a stop in front of a tall building, Jamal's heart skipped a beat. The building was sleek and modern, with glass windows that shimmered in the sunlight. The kind of place you only saw in movies or heard about in stories. He didn't belong here, he thought, but he was here now. He had to see this through. The woman, who had introduced herself as Isabella, opened the door and gestured for Jamal to follow her. He hesitated for a moment, but then stepped out of the car, trying to gather his nerves. The building's lobby was just as impressive as its exterior. Polished floors, high ceilings, and a receptionist who barely glanced at them as they walked past. Isabella led Jamal through the lobby, past elevators and grand hallways, until they reached a large, imposing door. She knocked once, and after a brief moment, the door swung open. Inside the office was a man sitting behind an oversized desk, his face stern but not unkind. He looked up when they entered, his eyes briefly scanning Jamal before turning to Isabella. "Is this the one?" the man asked, his voice low and authoritative. "Yes," Isabella replied. "This is Jamal, the one who helped Elizabeth." Jamal's confusion deepened. Elizabeth again. Who was she, really? And why did everyone seem to think he was involved in something that he didn't understand? The man stood up and extended his hand toward Jamal. "I'm Lucas. We've been waiting for you." Jamal shook his hand, trying to stay composed despite the knot in his stomach. "Waiting for me? I don't understand. What is all of this about? What do you want with me?" Lucas didn't immediately answer. Instead, he walked over to a large table covered with papers, files, and photos. He picked up a file and handed it to Jamal. "This is Elizabeth," he said, his voice calm. "She's been a part of a very exclusive network of people, powerful individuals, people who run things in the shadows." Jamal looked at the folder, his mind racing. The photos showed Elizabeth again, but now there were images of other people too, men and women in suits, some shaking hands, others in meetings. All of them looked important, far more than anyone Jamal had ever known. "You see, Jamal," Lucas continued, "Elizabeth isn't just a woman you met on a bus. She's a key figure in a very powerful circle. And when you defended her, when you stepped in without hesitation, you unknowingly became part of that world. You made an impression." Jamal blinked in disbelief. "But I didn't do anything special. I just helped her out. I don't even know her." Lucas leaned forward, his gaze intense. "Exactly. You helped her without asking questions, without knowing who she was. That's what makes you different. You've caught the attention of people who don't normally notice the ordinary ones. And that's why you're here." Jamal felt like the ground was shifting beneath him. This couldn't be real. He was just a regular guy from the neighborhood. He wasn't supposed to be involved in any of this. "What are you talking about?" Jamal asked, his voice shaking. "Why would anyone care about me? I don't want anything to do with this. I didn't ask for any of this." Isabella's expression softened slightly. "We understand. This is a lot to process. But the reality is, you're already involved. The choices you make from here on out will determine what happens next. We need to know that you're ready." Jamal's heart pounded in his chest. Ready? He didn't even understand what was happening. But somehow, everything was pulling him deeper into something much bigger than himself. "We need you, Jamal," Lucas said, his tone firm. "There's a decision coming, and you can be part of it if you want. You can choose to walk away, but we don't think you'll get far. Or you can join us and see just how much power you can have." Jamal looked at the files on the table, the faces of people he didn't recognize, yet they seemed so important. This wasn't just about Elizabeth anymore. This was about power, influence, and decisions that could shape everything. He turned his gaze back to Lucas, his mind spinning. "What's the decision?" Lucas paused before answering, his eyes steady. "A secret is about to be revealed. It will change everything. And we need someone like you. Someone who's not afraid to stand up, even when they don't understand why." Jamal's mind whirled with questions, but the one that stood out the most was simple. What was he really being asked to do? He looked at the man and woman in front of him, wondering if he could really trust them. Everything inside him screamed to walk away, but a part of him was already hooked. He had to know what came next. The question was clear now. Would he join this world of powerful people and secrets, or would he walk away and risk losing everything? Jamal's head was spinning. He could hardly process what Lucas had just said. What had he gotten himself into? Just yesterday, he was an ordinary young man, living a simple life, taking the bus to work. And now, he was being dragged into a world he couldn't even begin to understand. Lucas, sensing Jamal's confusion, gave him a moment to think. He didn't push him. Instead, he simply nodded at the chair in front of the desk, silently suggesting Jamal sit down. Jamal hesitated before lowering himself into the chair. He could feel the weight of Lucas's gaze on him, steady and unwavering. Isabella stood by the door, her expression unreadable. The room was heavy with silence, broken only by the faint hum of the air conditioning. It felt as though time itself had slowed down, and Jamal was trapped in a moment where every decision could change his life forever. After what felt like an eternity, Jamal took a deep breath and looked directly at Lucas. "I don't get it," he said, his voice steady despite the chaos in his mind. "You say I'm involved now, but what does that mean for me? What do you want from me?" Lucas leaned back in his chair, folding his arms across his chest. "We want to offer you a chance, Jamal. A chance to be part of something bigger. You've already proven you're willing to do the right thing, even when you don't know the full picture. You stepped in to help Elizabeth without a second thought. Now, we want to know if you're ready to take the next step. Jamal's mind raced. What next step? He wasn't ready for any of this. He was just trying to get by, to live a quiet life. But somehow, this opportunity was being thrust upon him, and he knew he couldn't ignore it. There had to be something more to all of this. I'm not a part of your world, Jamal said, shaking his head. I'm just a regular guy. I don't belong here. I don't want to be a part of whatever this is. Lucas's eyes softened slightly, but his voice remained firm. You may not think you belong, but the truth is, Jamal, people like you, people who do the right thing without hesitation, are rare. That's why you've caught the attention of people who run things from behind the scenes. This isn't just about helping someone on the bus anymore. It's about being part of a system that can change things. People in power need someone they can trust, someone who has integrity. Jamal stared at the floor, his thoughts spinning. Trust, integrity. It all sounded like something out of a movie. He wasn't a hero. He was just a guy who saw someone in need and stepped in. But now he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being pulled into something much larger than himself. What kind of system? Jamal asked, his voice quieter now. He was trying to piece things together, but it wasn't easy. Isabella spoke up, her voice calm but urgent. We're talking about a network of people who hold power. Political figures, business tycoons, influential leaders. They control more than you could imagine. But they need people on the ground, people who can help them make the right moves. People like you. Jamal felt a chill run down his spine. People like him. This was all too much. But there was a part of him that was curious, a part that wanted to know what it all meant. What did it mean to be part of a network of power like this? Is it dangerous? Jamal asked, his voice barely above a whisper. He had to know what he was really getting into. Lucas didn't hesitate. Yes, but if you want to change things, to make a real difference, you'll need to take risks. That's the nature of power. It's not for the faint of heart, but it's for those who are willing to fight for what's right. Jamal's thoughts were a blur. He had always believed that the world was the way it was, that people like him had little power to change anything. But what if this was his chance to do something bigger? To fight for the greater good, to stand up against the corruption and greed that had plagued the world for so long. A million questions flooded his mind, but one thing stood out. He couldn't go back to the life he had before. Not after all this. Whatever was waiting for him, whatever decision he made, it was going to change everything. And there was no turning back. I don't know what I'm supposed to do, Jamal admitted, his voice cracking slightly. But I don't want to just walk away. I want to understand. Lucas smiled, the first genuine smile Jamal had seen from him. That's a good start. Isabella stepped forward, her gaze softening as she placed a hand on Jamal's shoulder. We don't expect you to understand everything right away, but we believe you have what it takes to be part of this, to make a real difference. Jamal swallowed hard. The decision was looming, and he knew he couldn't delay it any longer. He had to choose. Would he step into this world of power and influence, or would he turn his back on it all and walk away? The answer wasn't clear, but one thing was certain. Whatever he chose, his life would never be the same again. The weight of the decision pressed down on Jamal's chest like a 1,000-pound stone. His thoughts were chaotic, swirling like a storm in his mind. He could feel the intensity of the moment, the pull of the unknown. One decision, and everything in his life would change forever. The room around him felt suffocating, as though the walls themselves were closing in, waiting for his response. Lucas and Isabella stood silently, both watching him carefully, their expressions unreadable. Jamal felt like a tiny speck in a massive ocean, tossed around by forces much larger than himself. But there was also a flicker of something inside him, a spark of courage. Maybe, just maybe, this was his chance to do something that mattered, to be someone who could make a difference. He glanced at Isabella first. She had been calm and patient throughout the conversation, her eyes soft yet filled with something else. Hope. Was this hope for him? Or was it hope for the greater cause that they believed he could be a part of? He couldn't quite tell, but there was something about her presence that made him feel less alone in that moment. Then, Jamal turned his gaze to Lucas. The man had an aura of control, as though he had seen and experienced things that could break most people. His steady, unwavering gaze never wavered, as though he already knew Jamal's decision, even though Jamal himself was still unsure. Finally, Jamal spoke, his voice quieter than before, but resolute. "I don't know what this world is, or what you want from me. But I do know that I can't ignore what I've seen. I can't ignore what I felt. I've been given an opportunity that many people would never even dream of, and I can't just turn my back on it. I want to know what I'm really a part of." Lucas's expression softened. It wasn't a smile, but it was the closest thing to one that Jamal had seen. "You've made the right choice," Lucas said, his voice calm but filled with meaning. "This is just the beginning, but you'll learn everything you need to, step by step. And soon, you'll understand why we chose you." Jamal nodded slowly, a sense of acceptance washing over him. He didn't have all the answers. In fact, he barely had any answers at all. But one thing was clear. He was no longer just a bystander in his own life. He had made a decision to take control, to be part of something bigger, even if it was a world he didn't fully understand yet. But as the words left his mouth, another thought crossed his mind. What happens now? Lucas didn't leave him hanging. Now you begin the real work. You'll be trained. You'll be guided. And you'll be a part of a network that could change the world. But it's not going to be easy. People like you, the ones with integrity, who still believe in doing what's right, are rare, and you'll be tested. Jamal's heart raced at the mention of tests. Tests sounded ominous. He didn't know what they meant by that, but there was no going back now. He had chosen this path, and he would follow it wherever it led. Isabella spoke up, her voice gentle but firm. "There's a lot to learn, Jamal, but we'll be with you every step of the way. You'll find your place in this world. It's a world that's full of power, yes, but it's also full of people who believe in making a difference. We need people like you to balance the scales, to remind us of what really matters." Jamal nodded slowly. He could feel a weight lifting off his shoulders, but also a new weight settling in its place. This was real. This was happening. And there was no turning back. Lucas stood up, signaling the end of the conversation. "We'll get started tomorrow. For now, get some rest. You'll need your strength." As Jamal stood up and walked toward the door, his mind was still racing. He glanced back one last time at Lucas and Isabella. They both watched him, their expressions unreadable, but there was a flicker of something in their eyes. Maybe it was expectation, maybe it was approval. He couldn't tell. But as Jamal stepped out of the room and into the hallway, a strange sense of peace settled over him. He didn't have all the answers, but he knew that whatever came next, he would face it head-on. He wasn't just a young man on a bus anymore. He wasn't just a bystander in his own life. He was part of something larger, and that meant everything.